bustling streets of Silver Springs carried their usual rhythm. Cars honking, pedestrians chatting, the aroma of fresh coffee wafting through the air. No one suspected that in mere moments, an event would unfold that would shake the city to its core. Officer Bradley and Officer Carter, two police officers known for their aggressive policing tactics, moved through the crowd like predators searching for prey. Their eyes locked onto a single man, Martin Green. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't running or looking over his shoulder. He was simply walking, his polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement, a well-worn leather briefcase in his hand. A navy suit hugged his frame, tailored and pristine, his pockets square, a final touch of elegance. But to Bradley and Carter, none of that mattered. What they saw wasn't success, it was suspicion. "Hey, you there!" Bradley's voice sliced through the air, loud enough for heads to turn. Martin halted mid-step, calm but alert. "Is there a problem, officer?" His voice carried no fear, only measured patience. That alone seemed to irritate the officers. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching yours involved in a theft nearby," Carter added, his tone carrying the weight of an accusation that had no foundation. Martin raised an eyebrow, his sharp mind already working. "That's a serious claim. May I see the report?" He wasn't combative, just firm, confident, and completely within his rights. But logic didn't matter here. Bradley's jaw clenched. He was used to fear, to submission, not to a man who met his gaze with unwavering certainty. "Hands where I can see them," Bradley barked, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." The moment the cold metal of the cuffs snapped around Martin's wrists, the street fell silent. A ripple of shock passed through the onlookers. A woman clutched her bag tighter. A man instinctively reached for his phone. Within seconds, cameras were rolling. They caught everything. The firm grip on Martin's arms, the way his suit bunched at the shoulders as he was pushed forward, the steady, unshaken way he carried himself even as they forced him into the patrol car. "You're making a grave mistake," Martin said, his voice eerily calm. The officers chuckled. "Yeah, sure," Carter muttered under his breath. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that their so-called suspect was not just any man. He was Judge Martin Green, one of the most respected justices in the state, and by tomorrow they would be standing before him in court. Inside the precinct, the arrogance of Bradley and Carter only grew. They treated Martin like just another arrest, another number to add to their so-called success rate. "Think he's some kind of big shot," Bradley sneered as he leaned against the desk. Carter smirked. "Yeah, well, he's quiet now. Guess he knows we got him." But Martin wasn't quiet because he was scared. He was waiting, letting them dig their own grave. Every refusal to give him his phone call, every mocking comment, every moment of their unchecked authority was another nail in their coffin. Outside the walls of the precinct, the city was waking up to what had just happened. The video of Martin's arrest was spreading like wildfire across social media. News anchors dissected the footage, community leaders demanded justice, and hashtags condemning racial profiling flooded the internet. The police department hadn't realized it yet, but they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. Then came the moment that changed everything. The precinct's duty sergeant finally glanced at the system records after Martin once again asked to contact his office. The sergeant's smirk faded as he typed in the name, Martin Green. The screen loaded, his face drained of color. Judge, municipal court, presiding over tomorrow's hearings. The realization hit like a sledgehammer. The officers had not just arrested an innocent man, they had arrested a judge who, in less than 24 hours, would be sitting in the very courtroom where they now risked standing as defendants. The laughter, the arrogance, the false confidence, it all disappeared in an instant. Panic set in. Bradley and Carter, so sure of their power moments ago, now scrambled for explanations. The sergeant, his hands now shaking, hurriedly called for Martin to be released. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The city had seen the truth. And tomorrow, justice would not only be served, it would be televised for the entire world to witness. The moment Judge Martin Green was released from his holding cell, the air in the precinct shifted. The same officers who had mocked him, the same men who had paraded him in handcuffs like a criminal, now refused to meet his eyes. The sergeant, pale and visibly shaken, tried to stammer out an apology, but Martin simply straightened his suit and walked out without a word. He had no interest in their excuses. He had a much bigger stage waiting for him, the courtroom, and the very men who had arrested him were about to find themselves on trial in front of the world. Outside the precinct, a storm was brewing. The video of Martin's arrest had gone viral overnight. News stations ran it on repeat, headlines flashing across screens. Judge arrested for looking suspicious. Cops face backlash. The footage was damning. It showed everything. The officer's aggressive approach, the baseless accusations, the mocking laughter. People weren't just angry, they were furious. Protests erupted outside the police department before sunrise. Signs demanding justice, chants condemning racial profiling, voices calling for accountability. It was clear this wasn't just another scandal. It was a reckoning. The police chief, blindsided by the growing outrage, was forced to hold a press conference. He tried to deflect, to say the incident was under review, but no one bought it. The public wanted justice, not excuses. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, preparations were underway for a hearing unlike any the city had ever seen. Judge Green was scheduled to preside over the cases that morning, but his first matter of business wasn't just any routine trial. It was a review of the officer's actions. The irony was almost poetic. The same men who had wrongfully detained him would now stand before him in a courtroom packed with journalists, community leaders, and officials. As Martin entered the courthouse, cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters shouted questions, but he didn't stop. He had no interest in making speeches. He knew the real statement would come from the bench. Inside the courtroom, the energy was electric. The gallery was packed. Activists, legal experts, everyday citizens who had seen the footage and refused to look away. At the defense table sat officers Bradley and Carter, their usual arrogance nowhere to be seen. They were stiff, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously as they realized just how deeply they had miscalculated. When Martin took his seat at the bench, the room fell into a tense silence. He looked down at the very men who had humiliated him just hours before. "Officers Bradley and Carter," he began, his voice steady, unwavering. "You are here today to answer for your actions in the unlawful detainment and racial profiling of an innocent citizen. One who, as it turns out, is the very judge presiding over this hearing." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. Carter swallowed hard. There was no easy way out of this. The evidence was overwhelming. The courtroom watched as the viral footage played on a large screen. The aggressive questioning, the baseless accusation, the unnecessary handcuffs. Gasps filled the room as the officers' mocking laughter echoed through the speakers. Witnesses took the stand, including bystanders who had recorded the incident. They recounted how Martin had remained calm, how the officers had escalated without cause, how it was clear from the beginning that this was not about any alleged crime, but about power, about prejudice. When it was time for the officers to speak, their defense crumbled before it could even begin. They tried to justify their actions, claiming they had been acting on a report. But under scrutiny, it became clear no such report existed. They had profiled Martin for one reason and one reason alone, because he was a black man in an expensive suit in the wrong place at the wrong time. The courtroom murmured in disgust. The truth had unraveled, leaving no room for excuses. The police department scrambled to contain the fallout. The chief, seeing the writing on the wall, announced that the officers would be placed on immediate suspension pending further investigation. But it wasn't enough. The public wanted more than just temporary consequences. They wanted systemic change. Outside the courthouse, the protests grew louder, more organized. Community leaders called for new training policies, independent review boards, and the dismissal of any officer with a history of racial profiling. But the biggest shift happened within Martin himself. He had always known the system was flawed, but now he had lived it firsthand. He had felt the weight of those handcuffs, the sting of being reduced to a suspect for no reason other than the color of his skin. And he knew this moment was bigger than just his own experience. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in change. As he left the courthouse, the crowd erupted into cheers. But Martin wasn't celebrating. He knew the fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next. As Judge Martin Green stepped out of the courthouse, the air crackled with an energy that couldn't be ignored. The protests outside had swelled into something far greater than just a reaction to his wrongful arrest. It had become a movement. Signs demanding justice, reform, and accountability filled the streets. And the people who had once whispered about police misconduct were now shouting for real change. Camera flashes flickered like lightning as reporters swarmed, eager for a statement. But Martin didn't speak, not yet. His battle wasn't for the cameras. It was for the system that had failed him and so many others. And it was far from over. Inside the courthouse, the fallout from the officers' actions had begun. The suspension of Officers Bradley and Carter was only the first step. A full internal investigation was launched, uncovering a disturbing pattern of racial profiling and misconduct in the department. As more cases were reviewed, it became clear that Martin's arrest was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systemic issue that had been ignored for far too long. The revelations sent shockwaves through the city, igniting a firestorm of public outcry. But Martin didn't stop at exposing corruption. He used his platform as a judge to push for real, lasting reform. He proposed mandatory de-escalation and anti-bias training for officers, independent review boards to oversee complaints against law enforcement, and strict disciplinary actions for any officer caught engaging in discriminatory practices. He wasn't just seeking punishment, he was demanding transformation, and the people were behind him. The pressure on the police department grew unbearable. The police chief, once dismissive of public concerns, was now forced to address the issue head-on. In a historic move, the department agreed to sweeping changes, including new hiring practices, increased community oversight, and policies ensuring transparency in all future arrests. It was the kind of shift that once seemed impossible, but now it was happening in real time, and the entire country was watching. Meanwhile, Officers Bradley and Carter faced their reckoning. Their suspension quickly turned into termination, followed by legal proceedings that could strip them of their right to ever serve in law enforcement again. The irony was staggering. The same system they had abused was now holding them accountable, and this time, there was no badge to hide behind. Yet for Martin, the fight was never about two officers. It was about changing the system that empowered them. He worked closely with city officials, civil rights groups, and law enforcement leaders to ensure that this momentum didn't fade once the headlines did. New policies were introduced to track racial disparities in arrests. Community policing initiatives were launched, creating partnerships between officers and the neighborhoods they served. And most importantly, a statewide law was passed making racial profiling a fireable offense, setting a precedent that could spread far beyond Silver Springs. As the months passed, the effects of these reforms became visible. Complaints of police misconduct dropped. More minority officers were recruited, ensuring that the force actually reflected the community it served. And for the first time in a long time, people felt heard, felt protected, felt like justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. One evening, as Martin walked through the city, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. A group of young officers, fresh recruits from the academy, were patrolling the streets. But instead of intimidating civilians, they were talking to them, engaging with the community, listening. It was a small moment, but it symbolized something much bigger. Change wasn't just written in policies, it was being lived. Martin had always believed in the law, but now he understood its deeper purpose, not just to punish wrongdoing, but to protect, to heal, to serve. His experience had tested his faith in the system, but in the end, it had also given him the chance to make it better. And that was a responsibility he would never take lightly. As he stood there, watching the city he had fought so hard for, he knew the work wasn't done. There would always be another battle to fight, another injustice to face, another reform to push for. But for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something rare: hope. This story isn't just about one man's fight for justice. It's about all of us, about standing up, about demanding change, about refusing to let injustice go unchallenged. Because when we hold those in power accountable, when we refuse to accept corruption as the norm, We build something greater than just reform. We build a legacy. If you believe in justice, in accountability, in the power of change, then make sure you're part of the movement. Like, subscribe and stay tuned for more real stories that challenge the system and inspire action. Because the fight isn't over, and neither are we.